It is Thursday, August 10th, 2017, and this is the MMA Beat. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. I join you inside our New York City studios. We are 4 present, but 1 man down. Ariel Helwani is with the rest of the MMA fighting crew. When I say the rest, I think just Esther and Casey, right?
I think Mark Romani is.
And Mark's there too?
He's there too.
Well, he didn't really count. He's this tall. In any event, they are there at the workout, so we're going to hold down the fort here today and look for their coverage, obviously, later today as well as tomorrow. But thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. As I mentioned before, my name is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM as well as MMA Fighting. To my left, it's the man, Jimmy Buffett's favorite. Look at this guy, huh? Chest hair and all. Can't get enough of that. The Washington Post, Jeff Wagenham.
Ratings, it's all about ratings.
It is all about ratings. Sumo wrestling. Then there is Chuck Mindenhall.
That was nice. 1 minute in and you got the sumo wrestling right.
I had to do it. Chuck Mindenhall from MMA Fighting as well as TheRinger.com. And at the end, he is the world's worst James Rodriguez fan, but we love him just the same. From MMAfighting.com, Danny Segura. What's up, man?
I'm good. Thank you.
Happy to have you back here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
All right, very good.
Glad to be back.
Let's get this started. Speaking of Ariel, who is not here, what was the biggest news this week? This one's pretty obvious. Paulie Malignaggi. I cannot believe we are living in a world where the biggest MMA news of the week is about a boxer who hates an MMA fighter. But here we are. All right. So Ariel did something last week that I thought was actually pretty smart, and I want to copy him. I'm explicitly copying him because I wanted to do the same thing here. We were talking about UFC 214 from all angles, and I'm not here to suggest that what Paulie Malignaggi did or said or represents is as big. But there are a lot of different ways this can turn. So let's start down the panel. Now, Paulie Malignaggi, for folks who need just a bit of a refresher, he was, first of all, on Ariel's show for an hour, just murdering Conor McGregor. Whether those accusations are true, you can decide for yourself. But he went on, it wasn't just that show. He went on show after show after show after show and just said the same thing over and over again, and calling McGregor cheap, undercutting his ability to take body shots, calling into question the integrity of the camp itself. I mean, the list goes on. Now that we've wrapped that up, Jeff, I pass the baton to you. Your biggest takeaway from what we will call on the show today, Pauliegate.
I like that. Well, my take has kind of shifted. Originally, when this first came out, I thought, Paulie is so naive. I mean, what was he expecting to happen? He's going to go in there into Conor McGregor's camp, and obviously there are cameras all over the place. What are they going to show? Of course they're going to show a shot of any kind of any advantage that McGregor might have. It's going to if Paulie goes down to the canvas by whatever means, of course they're going to show that. If Conor lands a punch, of course they're going to show that. It was naive to think that that was not going to be the case. But now, as this has evolved farther, and now we're hearing that Paulie would be maybe open to fighting McGregor after.
Oh my God!
Now I'm realizing it's not naive or stupid. It's a really smart move. It's him saying, I'm going to build up interest in McGregor, because is there really genuine heat between Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather? No, it's a big event because it's a big event. But if there's actual heat between McGregor and Malignaggi, if McGregor can put any kind of performance down against Mayweather, who knows? Maybe that's where we end up with at some point.
It seems like when this whole thing started, obviously it was an MMA guy against a boxing guy and Floyd Mayweather, and we were thinking like, oh, this is the novelty, right? You have the 2 biggest guys and the biggest confluence in history coming together for this mega fight. There's still, though, in a very black and white sense, was still boxing and MMA. And I feel like this is one of those weird things. You had Paulie going into an MMA guy's camp and trying to, from the surface you think like, oh, this is great. He can spar with an actual former champion, a guy who's going to give him some good looks. And
better than his other sparring partners by a country mile.
Yeah, so you think, you're only thinking of it in those terms. It's a weirdly divisive thing when he comes out of it and he talks about being exploited and all these things. And we all know Conor McGregor. We all know that's we know how Conor's going to look. We know he's a master at handling his media accounts and media in general in terms of how he presents himself. It wasn't surprising. It was only a little surprising that Paulie came out as strong as he did. And I felt like that divide, once again, was there from the boxing side to the MMA side.
Totally.
And I felt like that's really the big takeaway from this, was that there's a guy who has an integrity of boxing at the back of what he's doing. Even if he was trying to kind of give Conor some help, it was like he fell back on that integrity, and that's where he feels like his, things are gotten out of hand, especially when this guy has a 0-0 record. And he's trying to present it like, these guys have a lot of pride, and he fought for a long time, Paulie did. So to be presented in that way, you can see why his dander was up in the end. But to me, it's just that whole boxing and MMA split down the side. And even what was the guy? There was another guy who just came out on social media just recently, another boxer.
Oh, Lomachenko.
Yes, exactly. And
who might be the best boxer alive.
Right. Exactly. So you're like, you get that sort of thing happening, and you know, it just adds to that sort of spin to it.
Danny, before we get to any kind of additional takeaways here, what about what Chuck is saying? I think he's totally on the money. We said it before on the show. These worlds are not connected. MMA and jiu-jitsu connected. MMA kickboxing less so, but connected. MMA and amateur wrestling obviously quite connected. MMA and boxing, man, the communities are different, and even when you're in the same sport, there's just no alliances, and if there are, they're uneasy, and as you can see, they erode quite quickly.
Yeah, that was my biggest takeaway, how different these two sports are. I've been lucky enough to cover boxing, and I've been able to go to open workouts for Vladimir Klitschko and also Kovalev as well. And it's just all about this one guy. There's nobody else working out. All the media attention is on that person. The only interviews are for that person. You know, in MMA, we get scrums and with a lot of fighters, and, you know, fighters train, you know, with a bunch of fighters as well. But in boxing, it's really about this one person. And also just like the etiquette. Like, I've trained jiu-jitsu, and, you know, I sometimes post stuff on my Instagram, you know, training, sometimes submitting my training partners, and it's cool. And we see that in MMA too. But when it comes to boxing, that's a big deal.
It's a big
deal. The etiquette for these two sports are completely different. So that was one of my biggest takeaways, like how different these two sports are. And another takeaway was that, you know, the Conor McGregor, one of the things that I've been thinking was like, okay, where does Conor McGregor go after this? Like, Floyd Mayweather is really the biggest fight available. Like, where does he go? But, you know, and I was thinking it could be the end, and a lot of people thought, you know, he might retire then. But this is far from over. He's already building up another fight before he even fights. So, you know, who knows?
It also says that boxers, you know, if you're paying attention just to the MMA side, you forget that boxers have been doing this a lot longer. There's a lot more reverence towards their sport from a generational standpoint.
And they take more control because they don't have an overarching UFC to take control for them.
And they're not dumb. So if Paulie's coming out of this,
some of them are. I mean, Adrian Broner. I mean, come on.
Well, yes, but I'm saying like Paulie coming out of this whole thing and trying to set the table for something like this. It's just, I mean, come on.
So
it's
Jeff,
no brainer. Everybody's vying for the same spot in McGregor.
Jeff, you usually have a good nose for this, right? To what extent? At first you were like, well, I felt bad for Paulie, and now I don't. Is that because you believe whatever Paulie is saying to be artificial, strictly for some craven purpose of setting up a fight, or do you think there is any kind of genuine? I think Danny. I think we'd all agree with Danny. Clearly, these two worlds just don't. It's oil and vinegar. Okay. However, to the other point, how much of this is explicitly manufactured to set up some kind of lucrative opportunity afterwards?
Well, I tend to think that there was some genuine beginning to it. I do think that Malignaggi sees a photograph online of himself on the canvas, and with the implication being that that McGregor had sent him there, and that probably really genuinely pissed him off. And even the other photos that just showed it looked like McGregor connecting or almost connecting, on the verge of connecting with him. Just every image that we've seen from this sparring has essentially put McGregor in a good light, and Malignaggi
one of
in
them,
a
like
bad light.
Malignaggi's face looks a little busted up too.
And so originally,
and making funny faces.
Yeah. And so originally he goes, what was his first statement? He said, "Hey, let's see the whole video. Let's see the entire 12 rounds."
Right.
So, of course, we weren't going to see that and the implication I got from that was, well, because he probably got the advantage over McGregor over 12 rounds. Right. But he should. He's a former world champion boxer. McGregor's 0-0, and that brings us all back to the whole beginning premise of this thing, you know. And this is where it's dangerous for boxing because if 0-0, Conor McGregor even looks okay against Floyd Mayweather, it just elevates, you know, MMA striking in general.
It's kind of the hidden stakes, right, of this whole fight. Is like something like that could sway this perception of what's been going on. Like you mentioned, that divide is very real, and I have big reverence, you know, coming up, having read about, you know, the boxers of old, from the great chroniclers who did it. And you realize just how much goes into the fight game, how much these guys, all the self-belief, all the delusion, all the stuff that we've talked about a million times. But there's a certain pride, you know, that comes with it on each side. And you're right, for some reason, because the one has stood there forever, and there's an inferiority complex from which MMA was built out of, I think, in that shadow. And here you are colliding in this moment. If Conor McGregor shows up and he looks half competitive in this fight, or knocks him down, or anything like that, it's going to be very interesting how that perception changes.
I mean, look at if this were fought in a cage, if this were a mixed technique fight, I think nobody would imagine that Mayweather would last a minute. I think that most people would accept that Floyd Mayweather or anybody in boxing would just get demolished by a competent MMA fighter.
And we've
fighting
seen
in MMA.
I mean, we've seen more boxers come over, even if they're not like big names. We've just seen people convert.
But if an MMA fighter can go in there and in your discipline, in boxing, hold his own, man, that's a game changer.
Yeah. And I mean, Berto said on Ariel Helwani's show, he said if Floyd Mayweather were to lose to Conor McGregor, it'd be a huge blow to boxing and to the credibility.
I don't think he needs to lose. I really think that a competitive, if this fight is in any way, shape, or form competitive, I think that's a blow to the kind of I don't know, the image that boxing has as being like, well, those guys are just guys who roll around the mat, and we're the sweet science. We're the guys who really know how to stand up there.
Depends on your point of view. I think Floyd said that on paper
both sides.
On paper right now, Conor McGregor is the better fighter, right? Isn't that what Floyd said?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, so the way it works in politics is there's a presidential debate, right? And after it's over, they go to what's called the spin room, which is where all the flacks and everyone else tells you why the guy they're supporting won the debate, or whether one person lost. I think it'll be the exact same way. It'll be some kind of indistinguishable middle, and everyone will just claim victory. But I want to go back to something that, Danny, you brought up. You mentioned that in the boxing world, look, and I mentioned this on my live chat, people have no idea how to criticize Conor McGregor. He's either the Antichrist or he does nothing wrong. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure neither of those are correct. I do think, relative to boxing standards, the amount, not the act of putting a couple of shots of you lighting sparring partners on fire, but the amount, a little bit over the line. Chuck, do you agree? Did Conor not merely fall afoul in a relationship with Paulie? Did he break some kind of code here?
Well, you'd hope that they would have some kind of secret handshake going in then, if he's going to do that, if he's going to put out those photos and say, like, look, I'm going to make this appear just for the greater good of the fight, like, just to look like I'm competitive.
Just for a second, everyone's like, well, Paulie should have known better. Yeah. And I can buy that a little bit, but how much should he have known better?
I mean, Conor foreshadowed it. I don't know if you guys remember. I think
make him answer for it?
Yeah, he was after, not the Brooklyn, the Toronto, I think it was, or the
no, LA.
LA, okay, yeah. After the LA, they asked him, I'm like, okay, is it true that, Paulie's gonna come in and help you out? And he's like, yo, I'm gonna make him pay for it. And they went and got Paulie's reaction, and he's like, oh yeah, we're gonna work things out. And he seemed a little bit naive about the whole situation, but it's like, I mean, you talked smack about Conor McGregor, and we know
even going back, if you look at those 4 telecasts essentially from Showtime, Paulie was sort of more the voice of reason in terms of giving a fair shake to Conor McGregor. I thought it was Brendan Schaub, who was a little bit, on the MMA side, and he was like the one smiting his chest about what was going to happen and all this stuff. Paulie was very reasonable, and I feel like he probably went into it thinking that he was bringing a very open mind to this fight. I don't know if that's naive or how you want to look at that, but I think that when he went in and I think he sensed it when he thought, he said it a million times that he thought he was being set up as soon as he showed up and he sees Dana White and Fertitta and all these people around there. And I'm sure at that point he felt like an interloper and a guy who was basically out of his domain. And he was, being used for the greater good of this side, which probably gets, you could see how that would damage or get to some guy's pride who has a lot of pride, who's fought in this game for so long.
I like Paulie Malignaggi. I think he's the best boxing analyst that I've seen out there.
He's excellent as a commentator.
I think he's tremendous. 100%. But I'm going to defend Conor McGregor here. I think that McGregor, the images that I've seen at least, were Malignaggi on the canvas with McGregor standing there, not like sort of, not going Muhammad Ali on him or anything, but just sort of standing there. So and with no commentary
him on the canvas, though. If they just skip that, if they just don't show, if there's no photo of him on the canvas, especially on a push,
and then
more or less okay.
I think it's worth noting that McGregor didn't actually post that.
Sure.
It was sort of leaked. Sure. I mean, if you look at his Instagram, he has, I think, some sparring shots with Paulie.
Right, but if you go and look at Lomachenko's Instagram feed, he has 0 shots of sparring partners.
But there's
not
also
one.
the shot of him with Conor with his arms behind his back, sort of the way he was with Alvarez.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. I mean, he's showing off a little bit, but there's Conor McGregor. This is what, I don't know, if I signed a contract to spar with McGregor, which would be a death sentence for me, of course. But if I did that, I think I would understand. Yeah, I could take him. I know. I think I would understand that this is the way this guy operates. That he is all about self-promotion, and one way to self-promote is to carefully select the images that are going to be put out there publicly, because he has a big hill to climb. He's a 0-0 guy going up against a 49-0 guy, in less than a month.
The only thing you can build at this point is a competitiveness, right? An air of competitiveness, like that you know what you're doing, you belong in there. So you're trying to present that image that, look, here I am hanging with Paulie, you know what I mean? So you can understand why those images would come out. But the one, especially if he knocked him down and it was a true knockdown, you'd be like, okay, I guess I get that too. But even then, like you mentioned, I just don't think that you do that in normal circumstances.
Also, sparring is typically not about winning.
Yeah.
It can be if there's a gross disparity in skill set or someone's trying something they're not very good at.
And like he mentioned, you know, usually it's what they do is it's one guy fighting 12 different opponents, or fighting a rotation of guys to keep those guys fresh against your fade, you know, like, and in this situation, obviously it was a completely different setup.
Right. So this brings up to my other question. I know we're going to move on from this because I know some fans are probably vomiting on their laps right now. Here's the one part about this that I do think needs to be taken into consideration. There are two possibilities. One is that this organically just fell apart. And the other one is that, as some people have suggested, that maybe not pro wrestling necessarily, but that both guys are, you know, hamming it up in the event that they can set up something. Because I'll be honest, in terms of the take-home that McGregor gets from a McGregor versus Malignaggi bout, that's bigger than his take-home versus Khabib or Tony Ferguson. It's a bigger return financially. So I can understand that. But here's my point. In either case, why would you invite that into your camp? You are a fighter, a very decorated MMA fighter, one of the best we have, but you have no boxing experience professionally. You are fighting the best of this generation. What benefit is it to you to have this kind of distraction? Now, look, when I say distraction, am I suggesting that Conor McGregor is not training hard? I'm sure he is training his ass off. Nevertheless, I don't see how this ultimate process with Paulie Chuck benefited him.
I agree with you 100%. I will say that if one guy seems immune to distraction, it really does seem like Conor McGregor. He actually seems like a guy who goes out of his way to create distraction. He sees it from such a different elevation than most fighters that I don't think he gets caught up in small things. And it's really evidence. As far as I know, I haven't seen him react to this at all. Has he? Like,
well, so Friday, tomorrow, and Ariel will be there. They have that workout. That will be his first chance. That's going to be very interesting.
And you know he'll have the right things to say, or he'll do the, you know, he'll spin it the way he wants or whatever. But I mean, I honestly don't think it was a distraction for him ultimately. Like you said, maybe it sets up something. Who knows? But for a guy like that, I think he could have went this whole camp without having anything like that, because just the novelty's in place. It's like you've got a guy who's basically been infallible, and he's handled himself in this ridiculous meteoric rise through the UFC, has done these historic things, has this belief system in himself. You don't really need this extra stuff to come out of it. So it might be a distraction for people, you know, at least for the, you know, people who are really paying attention to it, to have this little side street to go down and think about. But for him, I don't really think it matters.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think for McGregor it was a distraction at all. I mean,
Not at all.
He got maybe a little bit, but I don't think anything significant.
Okay.
I mean, he got some quality rounds in with a former world champ.
20 total, sounds like.
And while he was at it, he got some payback and got to tarnish his image a little bit, and then possibly set himself up for another fight down the future. So I don't think it was a major distraction. I think... Yeah, I think he's pretty concentrated in his camp.
Okay. And I also think that it's invaluable to get that kind of work in with a former world champion. And recently retired, but recently retired. So,
but if they're just thumping it out, it's not like the best work you can get.
There's something. There's to get in there with a guy who's certainly better than his current sparring partner.
100% true.
And so the fact that he could go in there and, you know, what is McGregor's biggest thing? It's self-belief and confidence. And so he knows that he's gone in there with this guy, and you know, he wasn't knocked down. I mean, I think Malignaggi would have told us by now. If, well, you want to see a knockdown, you should have seen when I knocked him down in the third round, in the fourth, and the fifth. That apparently didn't happen. You know, we haven't heard anything about that happening. So regardless of whether McGregor really got the better of him, if he just hung in there with a two-time world champion boxer, that has to elevate his confidence. You know, obviously there's a big gap between Malignaggi and Mayweather. We'll give that, but it's better than what he would have. It's better than the experience that he carried into this whole spectacle.
The only thing that kills me about this is how every time we start with something very interesting with Mayweather and McGregor, where there is this novelty or at least some kind of an intrigue, it gets destroyed pretty quickly. So like they had the press tour, first 2 days, you're like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever seen. And then it just gets ridden into the ground.
There's grease all over.
Same way with Paulie Malignaggi, you bring him in there, you're like, man, this. I mean, game changer for Conor, I don't know, but this was interesting, and then it just kind of flames out. We always seem to be trending in that direction with this fight. Last thing on this, very quickly, we'll go down the line, Dean. I'll start with you. And I'm just going to ask you in a very loaded, completely unfair way.
Okay.
If I talk to you in a year and a half's time, is there a McGregor Malignaggi bout that has taken place?
Has taken place?
Yes, or scheduled, 18 months.
Okay, or scheduled. I would say yes, because, you know, the money's there. You know, we know the UFC liked that deal with Mayweather. You know, they made some good money out of it. And, you know, I mean, if he goes back to the UFC, sure, there are some money fights, but I don't think to the level with Paulie. Boxing money is where it's at.
I would say no, only in the sense that, you know, you're getting the biggest circus you could possibly get with this fight coming up, and depending how he looks, obviously, like if he was competitive, maybe that changes. But if it goes the way I think any crafted eye would see it, and he's just schooled in the ring, I just don't think there'd be the demand really to see that. And Conor McGregor is all about where the demand will be going forward too.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm also on the no camp because I feel like this is one of those social media, you know, firebombs where something explodes all over social media, it becomes a big deal for a few days, and all of a sudden it's like, Paulie?
Because everybody is going to be dropping in on Conor at some point. Everybody's going to, you know, people are going to latch on to whichever thing they want at that time.
But the Mayweather bout happened because of social media. I mean, if this is a boring fight with Mayweather, you could definitely see, you know, Conor McGregor get on the mic, oh, this guy didn't want to fight me. Well, I beat up Paulie.
For most MMA fans who are intrigued by this, I'm sure more than half of them have never even heard of Paulie before this thing. So that's the big difference.
Of course not.
Yeah.
I mean, could you name 5 Paulie Malignaggi fights? Right. Defense rests, Your Honor. And I do like him. And the only interesting thing that we see going forward is to what extent this colors his broadcast. Does he build McGregor up? Does he put him down? What happens there?
That's actually a disappointing thing for me too, because I think he is a brilliant analyst on TV, and I don't want him to go in there with an edge. I want him to go in there and tell us what's really happening.
We'll have to see how that goes in August. All right, which brings us to our next topic. Danny, I'll start with you on this one. Boy, the crowd goes mild, huh? GSP versus Bisping. Now, it wasn't formally announced. However, George St-Pierre took to, I guess, social media and announced he had signed his bout agreement. I guess we haven't heard from Michael yet, so maybe we're getting a little premature. But for the sake of this show, let's say it is all basically confirmed. It will go down November 4th, UFC 217, right up the street at Madison Square Garden here in New York City. Okay. I did not see a ton of enthusiasm for this one. So let me start with you. Number one, what is your general level of enthusiasm today? We all know these are like stocks, right? They can go up, they can go down. As it stands today, where is it? And ultimately, what do you make of the UFC's decision to go this route?
Yeah, I think my level is pretty low. I think most people's are too. When this fight was announced, I mean, even when they announced the Tyron Woodley matchup, it's like, oh, the winner here was going to get GSP. You know, nobody was like claiming, oh, no, let's book the Bisping fight. No, you know, turn the ship around or whatever. You know, nobody was claiming that. Now that it's booked, I mean, it just shows how persistent they are that they wanted that matchup. I think, you know, the hardcores are missing a point because like they see that matchup and perhaps it's not super exciting that we've been having so much drama with those two that, you know, people don't even want to see it. But to the casual fans, you know, GSP's a name that they recognize, and so is Michael Bisping, and he holds the title. So that could be a blockbuster fight for casuals. And it seems that, you know, the company's sort of trending in that direction, and it seems they're starting to sort of target, you know, fights and cater for that audience a bit more. So I think, you know, the excitement level is very low right now, but I think as the fight and the promotion gets a little closer, plus at Madison Square Garden is always going to be a big event. They're going to make it, you know, look, exciting and have a nice build up to it. So I think it'll pick up.
I feel like I'm just exhausted trying to wrap my mind around it. It's like, you know, the starting line on this one, it feels like the finish line. It's like one of those weird things, like you finally are to the point where it's...
And they still haven't announced it.
And it's still not really fully announced. But it's one of those, it re-kicks in as you kind of think about it and try to build your enthusiasms up for it, about what happens with this division. I mean, ultimately, if GSP wins this belt, I mean, that's what's really the strange thing is, what is the future after this thing? You don't know. And that's one of the strange monkey wrenches that has always existed with this fight since they prematurely did that press conference back in, what, February or March? And it continues to be the thing. And once it becomes legitimate and they start to finally chirp at each other, maybe we start to put our blinders on and get excited about it a little bit. But I am 100% in that same dead space where you're just like, I guess they're going to do it, and, you know, you're waiting for something to kind of put some lifeblood into this fight.
Yeah, I'm in that spot in terms of being interested in all the pieces of it, but not the actual putting together of it. I'm not that interested in GSP versus Bisping, although I think it could be an interesting matchup. It could be stylistically a fun thing to watch. But I'm more interested in seeing, what is GSP going to look like when he comes back against, whatever opponent. How's Bisping, is he going to be able to hold on to the belt that nobody really thought he was going to win in the first place? What's going to happen at middleweight if really whoever wins? What's the future?
True.
What does the future hold for middleweight division? What about the welterweight division? Is GSP, if he wins or loses, is he going to go back there? So there's a lot of pieces to it that interest me. But the actual matchup, I just didn't feel it was the right one.
It continues to feel like there's like a red rope in this exclusive lounge, right? Like where where Michael Bisping is, and he keeps inviting these guys that he wants in there, and all the real contenders are standing outside of it, and that's how the division has felt this entire year, and it won't resolve itself in that sense. So you don't know. I know Whitaker is hurt right this second, and Yoel Romero and all these guys. You're just not sure how they're going to factor in. And I feel like that's kind of, it's always that meritocracy thing where you think, what happens to the guys who merited this chance going forward?
If you're a promoter, you realize that if you're interested in operating in the pay-per-view space, that your best sales are going to come day of. Or Friday, maybe, right? If you think about when you purchased a pay-per-view, it was probably the day of or the day before, most likely, right? And I feel like we're living in an age now where it's that times 1,000. Here's what I mean. You went up in the lead to UFC 214, and that was a great card, and there was some enthusiasm ahead of time, but even then you heard some belly aching. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be 3 blowouts in the title fights, and yada yada yada. And I made this point on my live chat too. You look at all those metrics, and you knew you were going to get a good card, absolutely, and it was going to sell respectably well, but it wasn't going to be a blockbuster. And then when Wednesday came to Thursday, came to Friday, came to Saturday, it turned. And this is what I mean. That's always been the case. But MMA fans are so used to fights falling out now, literally the day of, that they have shortened that tolerance. But if these two guys can make it to the finish line, whatever enthusiasm you see now, I think it's going to be a big
Michael
hit.
Bisping is a master when it gets down to the nitty-gritty. By Friday, you want to see what's going to happen with Michael Bisping. He's always been able to draw, even with Jorge Rivera, if you remember, going back to that fight.
The story is endlessly, it's so modular. You can add so many things to it.
And there will be something about seeing GSP on the scale and all that stuff that you'll be like, okay, we're finally at this moment, which will also re-register a whole.
I think I'm also a bit critical on how they're going to promote this because, fans want to see real rivalries. They want to see guys that hate each other, square off. And they've sort of kind of portrayed that a little bit, but we've also seen they've been, working together to get this matchup done. And it seems kind of fake a little bit sometimes, the rivalry there.
Welcome to Fight Sports, Danny.
Well, yeah, but it seems very obvious, So,
I mean, literally, you've got GSP calling into Bisping's podcast. Hey, guys.
Let's figure this out.
we should fight tomorrow. Like, oh, my God.
I want to take you to the Casbah.
I like how I'm doing like a bad Pepe Le Pew accent. All right, but here's the reality of it. And you bring up something interesting, Danny, so let me pitch it right back to you, which is there are actual stakes in this fight, not merely because there's a title on the line, but however many days ago was UFC 214, and Jon Jones returns, thumps Daniel Cormier, takes the title back, you look at his record, you say, man, it's the greatest of all time. And then you realize, well, wait a second, all right? If St-Pierre gets 2 titles in 2 weight classes, and I'm sorry, you can say whatever you want about Michael Bisping and his title defense against Dan Henderson, he beat Luke Rockhold fair and square, all right? Cleanly, on short notice himself. If he gets 2 titles in 2 weight classes and does it, Danny, after coming back after 4 years away, that alters the debate. I'm not saying it fundamentally changes it, but it alters the debate about who the greatest of all time is because 2 weight class achievement is something that, as good as Jones has been, and I think he's on the precipice of getting it, as we speak today, has not done that.
Yeah.
How big are the stakes in this fight?
I think if he wins, there'll still be an asterisk on that victory because we all know that Michael Bisping perhaps is a favorable matchup for GSP.
Wow. Como se dice hater in Espanol.
If you were to fight Yoel Romero or Luke Rockhold, then that'd be a little different. Or guys that are perhaps propose more issues to St-Pierre. If St-Pierre were to win the title and maybe defend it against Robert Whitaker or something like that, I think maybe you can start putting him up there for sure. I mean, he's already up there, but like really at number 1.
Right.
But if he just wins the title and beats Michael Bisping and then retires, obviously it helps his cause. But I think there's still an asterisk.
Okay. So how do you say hater in Spanish? Do you know how to say
that? Well, there's no really.
Danny, I think it's just Danny.
Sure.
I think you're putting the asterisk on the wrong guy because Bisping is the champion. He deserves to be the champion because he beat the guy that had the belt. So he's a legitimate champion. Say what you will about the Henderson defense or whatever. The asterisk of anybody goes to GSP because where did he earn a middleweight title shot? He did not earn a middleweight title shot. He's never fought there. So I think if you're talking about legacy, yeah, of course he will have been a two-division champion, but he never really, there wasn't really a meritocracy-based
neither for Penn when he fought Hughes the first time.
Right. I mean,
but people still give it to him.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm not saying that this delegitimizes it, but there are times when guys, mow down an entire division to get someplace, and then they mow down another division to get someplace. That's a whole different animal.
His past resume just speaks for itself too, though. Like when you look back at just,
he's already top 3 without this.
100%. Right. So as you just look at what he's done, and he actually pulled the rare trick of walking away. And I know the fight was close, it was controversial, but he walked away with the victory officially, and is returning. And I think that there's really not a lot of examples, maybe other than Jon Jones with his suspensions and everything, where there's a guy that great coming back to a situation, 4 years removed? Right. And I think that would have to speak pretty highly of him if he comes in at a higher weight, even if it's, even if we're discounting Michael Bisping as a champion to an extent, to win at. I mean, he's already, like you said, he's top 3. I just think that it only improves his case. It just becomes a matter of argument. Like, who do you want to take?
I mean, I think it does improve, obviously, but
does it cross the threshold for you?
I don't know. I would have to wait till that day and see how everything feels.
Let me up the ante, Danny. What if, and again, this may never happen, but what if St-Pierre absolutely clubs him, stops him in 2?
Then, maybe that would have a different feel for sure. Yeah. That he would accomplish something that, a lot of fighters have failed to do against Bisping. But I do want to point out that, Bisping's sort of title reign hurts GSP a little bit if he wins, because it's not the same thing like, for example, McGregor going in there and stopping Aldo, who's, been champion for forever and defeated, the top guys for many years. Bisping's sort of title reign does have an asterisk there. Sure, he won the title fair and square. He knocked out Luke Rockhold, who's one of the very best, but he defended against Dan Henderson. There is something to be said there. Some people say Dan Henderson won that fight as well. Right. Now, if Bisping were to beat Yoel Romero, Robert Whittaker, he already has that victory over Luke Rockhold, and he's already an established champion, and GSP would go in there and take the title, then, you would be like, by far, GSP is probably the greatest fighter of all time.
Okay. I think one thing we can say, though, is that GSP, it's not exactly playing with house money, because he certainly could possibly hurt his legacy, but I think that it's somewhat of a win-win for him. I think he goes in there and doesn't perform that well. Well, it's because he was away for 4 years. I think he would have to really put on an embarrassing performance for him to tear himself down from where he stands.
And honestly, one of the strange parts about this fight is you're dealing with the twilight of the idols. Both guys are maybe one bad performance from saying, I'm done, And that's always a weird sort of circumstance for something at this high of a level where you're thinking, it's for a belt and all this. Yeah, but there's like this idea that, let's say the Bisping loses, he could just be done. And GSP, if he loses, I think he's even kind of said, like, probably one and done.
Yeah, but who is ever done in MMA?
True.
Everybody is redeemable.
Boy, Jeff is good with the segues today. All right, Jeff. Yeah. Speaking of potentially done, so Rashad Evans fought at UFC Mexico. Did we all see this fight? Yes? Yeah. Okay. Wow. I did not get a good feeling watching that, and by that I didn't feel for the danger of Rashad Evans. In fact, that was not one of my, not that Sam Alvey is not capable of knocking people out. In fact, we know he is quite well, but Rashad was able to basically hang around. But here's what I'm noticing. First of all, the bigger question I have is as follows. What does the UFC do with somebody who is clearly past their prime, who doesn't believe that they need to hang it up? Because ultimately, if you think about it, in the case of Evans, or you think about the case of BJ Penn, what do you need? You don't have to give them a fight. But if they want to fight, and you have, let's say, 2, 3 left on their contract, and you're not giving it to them, it seems almost punitive. Yeah. What you really need from them to stop doing this is you need them to comply. You need their compliance and their agreement saying, I'm done. And in the case of Penn, we'll see what happens, but obviously that fight in Oklahoma was not great against Dennis Seaver, and this one against UFC Mexico. And here is the interesting contradiction, Jeff. They used to give Chuck Liddell to, former champ Rich Franklin, and Rich Franklin just, brutally KOs him. And that's really terrible, but then you're like, okay, well, that's pretty strong evidence. Now what they're doing is they're putting these guys in these locales, like Oklahoma, and Mexico City is that great city, but it's very, very far away from
But they smuggled them in underneath all the top fights.
And you're second or third somewhere on the main card. But as a consequence, they hang around just enough to keep saying to themselves, I can turn this corner. What does the UFC do with aging stars?
Yeah, boy, that's the million-dollar question. I mean, I feel as though the company, the promotion has handled Evans about as well as you could. Really, they didn't try to make a buck off of putting him up high on a pay-per-view or something. They stuck him pretty far down on a card against an opponent who I would say was at an appropriate level, a guy that he could compete against at this stage in his career. And he still wants to compete. I guess their responsibility as well is this a guy who still merits a roster spot in our promotion? Are we paying this guy more than we could pay somebody else to occupy that place on a card? And then if they say no, then maybe you just release them. But if you do that, well, then you're going to be helping your direct competition, because the Bellator would pick the guy up and start selling his fight. So they're in a tough position.
We talked about when he was going into that fight with Daniel Kelly, like what a great piece of matchmaking that was at the time, because you're thinking Daniel Kelly, he's a 40-year-old guy, but he's really good. He's very dangerous. He's won all these fights in a row, but he hadn't fought anybody of an elite class yet. So you're thinking, this is perfect. You got a guy who's a former champion going against him. And we just didn't see the Rashad Evans in that fight, right? Like that you wanted to see that he still had it. I felt like this last one was more of like, okay, we're going to de-emphasize it just a slightly little bit more and put you in against Sam Alvey. Mm-hmm. And it was more of a favor, I think, in this situation to say like, hey, we know you're not, we know you still want to do it. We know that, so we're going to give you the last chance here to do this in this very non-spotlight event. And unfortunately, he didn't just lose it. There was just, like you said, it was very uncomfortable because you felt like he was wrestling with his mind in the fight. He wanted to play it a little smarter. I think he was trying to wait for his moments too much, and it just ultimately made for a fight that was hard to watch in the end, especially when you see them toiling. He can't get done what he's setting into to do. And it's that combination of, fading star with a style that at this point is like, it just makes for a bad-looking fight. That I think you got to. I don't know what you do in that situation. But like with Chuck Liddell, it was easy for them. They're like, hey, Chuck's always part of the organization. We'll just hire him. We'll just bring him in and give him a job.
You can't hire everybody.
You can't hire everybody. With somebody like Rashad Evans, as sad as it is, I think the bottom line is either you have to talk with him and see if you can retire, or you have to let him go. I mean, you have to just take the chance that maybe if Bellator wants him, okay, but at that point, you just have to say, like, our product, we have to value our product above this, at this point.
And how complicit are we in this?
And all that stuff, yeah.
I think the UFC has two options here. Either they decide they don't want to make any more money off Rashad Evans and just release him from his contract, which opens the possibility, like Jeff said, to go to a competitor like Bellator. Or I know this second option is a bit controversial, but the Legends division. Yeah. I mean, Rashad Evans still has a big name, and, although he didn't look great, he hasn't been getting knocked out. He hasn't been getting,
Okay, against Glover, he got brutally KO'd. But you're talking
Glover
has
insane amount of power.
Sure, but you mean
can do that to anyone.
I mean, against the Dan Kellys and Sam Alveys of the world, he's been able to be just fine.
So, to be honest, like, it might sound kind of crazy, but I wouldn't write him off completely. I wouldn't mind seeing him maybe test himself against a Nate Marquardt or even an Anderson Silva, or somebody that perhaps belongs in the Legends divisions, or Vitor Belfort. I don't know if they're friends. I know they trained together for a bit, so I don't know if they would be open to a fight. But something like that. Obviously, the Sam Alvey performance kind of put me off a little bit. But if they would have sort of not booked that and they would have put him in the Legends division right after a Dan Kelly fight and matched him up against another sort of aging legend, I think that would have been fine.
Jeff, are you have palatability for the Legends division?
I'm not really into that. I feel that this is a dangerous enough sport when people are young enough to have fast reflexes. But this is what goes away. The smarts. Rashad Evans has all the smarts that he always had from all of his experience as a fighter, but those reflexes aren't what they once were. And careers end. I mean, we were before the show. You and I, we were talking about your Denver Broncos and how they're what's their quarterback situation. Well, they had Peyton Manning, a couple years ago, but at a certain point, the guy just he can't perform anymore.
I will say too, with Rashad Evans, there's a queasiness to watching him continue to compete, because we know that he was removed from a couple of cards after that whole MRI thing that happened in New York. You didn't really get a sense that that doesn't give you like a vote of confidence in terms of, like, we saw something in his brain scan, and then he goes to Toronto, he's not able to compete there. You feel like they were just at that point almost this is just the feeling. I don't know how it was resolved, but that they're just looking for the commission that will kind of like, oh, that's fine, we can get him in here. I don't really want to see that. If he's not fighting offensively anymore and he's afraid of that and stuff like that, the whole thing just becomes a guessing game. It becomes too mental for him, and it becomes too frustrating for a viewer. That combination is just no good. I like Rashad Evans. I think he's very bright. Like he's done good analyst work with Fox, I believe, like just kind of filling in spots. You know, he's a smart guy who has a bright future in other things. I just don't see why he would need to keep doing this at some point.
I think you're right, though. Ultimately, they just got to cut him loose at some point. And you could say, well, Bellator might pick him up. Maybe Bellator does. And look, not everyone's in the exact same position as Rashad. Some are a little bit past, some are a little bit before. But if that lesson from the Bellator pay-per-view was something, it's that the fears that they could cobble together guys who can't hack in your organization, and then all of a sudden they can just be major pay-per-view stars. Not exactly true. So I think you just have to do the right thing here. Yeah. Quickly on one topic before we get to some other fun-ish, well, sort of fun topics. I mean, I guess nothing MMA is quite all that fun. But very quickly, Jon Jones said, hey, it looks like Brock Lesnar is not going to be available for a while. I believe he told Michael Strahan on Good Morning America. I cannot believe Michael Strahan is on Good Morning America, but that's the world we live in.
Jon Jones.
I know. It's like, what is happening here? In any case, he said the UFC is pitching him some other options. So let me just do that, Chuck.
Yeah.
If you're pitching options to Jon Jones, and here's the other interesting wrinkle to this, he didn't say he wouldn't, but he also said the 9% tax, I think sales tax or whatever, well, no, whatever it is, income tax, I forget which one it was, but they take 9% off the top from your earnings if you compete at Madison Square Garden. He was like, no, thank you. So if that's also out of play, give me his next fight, when and where.
So for Jon Jones, I mean, the great thing about where he was to where he is now is that things changed so much when in his absence. I thought we'd lost the Gustafsson rematch for good. As soon as I saw Gustafsson lose a couple fights and you felt like he was kind of out of the picture, which was a shame to me because in my mind, UFC 165, what happened in that fight, the first Gustafsson one, is still one of the great live events I've ever attended, probably one of the best fights I've ever seen in terms of UFC. And so I always wanted to see that, and in his absence, there was some time off for Gustafsson. He was able to kind of get in there and get a couple of victories in a row, and we're right back into a situation where he's right at the top of the rankings, and you have the chance to put back that fight. And in my mind, I mean, that's a no-brainer. I would put together that fight wherever it is. It doesn't matter to me, but I just would like to see that fight again for just given how competitive the first fight was and also the bad blood that has festered between those two guys for as long as it has. I still think that you got a great play because you got a guy from Sweden who has the chance, one more chance to get by Jon Jones, which is its own, like the Irish thing, but Sweden on a lesser scale. Just you have your own nationality conflict there, which is fun. In my mind, though, that's the fight to make. I would go with that fight above just about anything else I can imagine on there.
Yeah.
Okay, Denny?
I think, as you said, I feel like Alexander has lost a little bit of his step. He did lose a few fights, and now he's on a 2-fight win streak. But I don't feel like he's fully convinced the audience that he's 100% back and he's on a roll and he's killing it. So I wouldn't mind seeing Alexander Gustafsson sort of sit out in this one and have Volkan Ozdemir stepped in, who's creating pretty big headlines. Keep the Jon Jones active, defending the title. Let Alexander Gustafsson pick up some momentum, and then build that fight to the big rematch that's supposed to be.
I'd have to say Jon Jones, Rashad Evans too. That would be the one. I mean, I think we can agree that's the.
Had to go there, didn't you?
No, actually, I'm with Gustafsson, and I think to me that's the only fight right now. I think that's the one that, because of the history, because of what came before, that's the one light heavyweight fight. I mean, obviously, at some point, stepping up I'd love to see him go after Stipe Miocic at some point. I think that'd be a really fun fight. But I don't think that'll be the first heavyweight fight he'll take. I think that the Lesnar one is a big money fight, so he'll wait for Lesnar, and then
that seems to be something that's in his mind. So
and I wouldn't be opposed to him getting Alexander. What I would be extremely opposed is if Volkan Ozdemir fights Alexander Gustafsson, which they've been talking about that at least Volkan has, because I mean this is clearly a division that lacks contenders by a lot. And if you do that matchup, you're basically killing a contender right there. Who would have guessed
at the beginning of the year we even talking about Volkan in that space? I mean, that's how thin it is at the top.
Well, you start knuckling people into the dirt in 3 nanoseconds, and all of a sudden your fortunes change. Yeah. I'm going to go with Gustafsson. When and where, I think doesn't matter. The Detroit card, end of the year card. It's a shame he won't fight in MSG, but I get it. If people are going to take 10% of my cash, I'd want to fight somewhere else too. But I feel like there's still a lingering belief, whether it is justified or whether it is not, it is something transactionable. Yes, I think that's a word. Where people believe that as good as Jon is, he came into his run in the UFC at the end of everyone else's primes.
Yeah.
And that the one guy who was in his prime and negated his length and reach was Gustafsson.
And remember we laughed about those promos.
Well, we laughed about the promos because, like, this guy's a giraffe.
Yes.
This guy's also a giraffe. They can reach things at the top of the cupboard. Like, all right, I mean, that's not the most inventive. But there is a belief, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I'd like to see it play out one more time. Is it true that if you could take away those physical advantages from Jon, that somebody can really close the distance on him, quite literally?
I wouldn't rule out the Garden, though, because even despite what Jones has said about it costing him more money, hey, if it's really important to the UFC to make that the venue, kick in a little bit of extra money to Jones to compensate for the amount of money he has to pay the state. And if it's, it seems like the UFC is all about the big event right now, and it doesn't get any bigger than presenting your best fighter in the Madison Square Garden
Especially
spotlight.
coming off where he just did. I thought he really handled himself. That star rose right back up. I felt like everybody's now in this space where they accept Jon Jones again, and all. I just feel like that would be the biggest thing they could do is put him in his native state and center that whole card around
And
him.
if you notice, like what the big thing is now, it used to be in media, the big thing was who got the big pre-fight interview. Now it's who gets the Monday or Tuesday celebrity tour.
Yeah.
And he was all through New York, man, and he went to Good Morning America. He was on with Sway, who doesn't have the answers. Bit of an inside joke. But he went on a bunch of big places, and I feel like New York media obviously knows him, embraces him. It would be a big deal, but we'll see what he wants to do. Now, let me get to something a little bit off the beaten path here. I've been noticing something, and I think you guys have as well. So every Tuesday, the Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series airs on Fight Pass. The one on Tuesday was fantastic. Shouts to Mike Rodriguez, Alex Perez, who own UFC contracts. Okay. But there's a part of it that is rubbing people the wrong way. Now, not everybody, but you can see there is a clear vocal presence about it. Some people cannot stand the Snoopcast. There is the normal commentary feed, which is either Paul Felder and Yves Edwards or Dan Hellie and some other donk. I don't know his name. If you don't want the normal feed, you can choose the optional feed, which is Uriah Faber and Snoop Dogg. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I know they're allowed to drink Tanqueray, which is like, I mean, and they're putting, Mountain Dew in it, of all things. But they're also, or at least I believe Snoop is also smoking marijuana live on set.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't believe that.
I know. Part of that's like, I don't understand what the UFC's approach to marijuana is anymore at all. Okay, but just another story for another time. I have noticed, I saw Ally Quinta on Twitter, I saw some other fighters, including Matt Brown. They do not like this. They do not like it at all. And their basic argument, Jeff, is that he is, on top of being ignorant, incredibly, in their judgment, disrespectful. And I think they could probably forgive the ignorant part if he wasn't so, he's not combative, but, this is a real thing he said, from Turtle, take the booty position, or singing the lullaby when a guy gets viciously KO'd.
Did he get this from Skip Bayless, the booty position? Is that part of
No, Skip Bayless thinks that's a real position. No, that's the take the booty position. I've seen that in sumo wrestling. So here's the question for you. This is what occurred to me. I think fundamentally fighters believe that they're not exempt from criticism, but they believe, from what I can tell, some do anyway, that their threshold for it should be a little bit higher. In other words, they don't want to tolerate this as much as other professional athletes do. Right. Are they right to push back against things like the Snoopcast?
I think they have the right to push back against anything, really. I mean, it's their livelihood. Look, if you spend, 8 hours a day in the gym...
How is it different from any other professional athlete?
Well, every other professional athletes all across the board are pushing back in one way or the other. The difference is that in most sports, these days, the media has much different level of access. It's a much more controlled access. The beat writers for any of our favorite teams have a certain little window of opportunity to speak to only the athletes whom the PR guy has said go speak to them. So it's very controlled. And so I understand these guys being upset if, they don't want to be training in this sport and learning all these skills and then have some knucklehead call it the booty position. I mean, I think that...
Did he take the booty position?
Well, of course. I mean, that's a 2 point... You get a 10-8 round if you get the booty position. But so I understand why they're complaining about it. The thing that amazes me is that I've watched it a little bit too, and I don't have the same complaint they do, but I just find it to be... just poorly executed in general. I mean, I think that's actually a good idea. I like that the UFC is doing something different. Give us an alternative view, but I just feel it's a nice idea executed really, really poorly.
I just feel like, in the evolution of our sport, in the evolution of MMA, you went from the spectacle all the way into this very, what we want to call like pushing into the mainstream, or however you want to say it, where people are basically becoming immune essentially to what they're not immune in the sense that they don't feel it, but you know what I'm saying? Like they're no longer as sensitive to what they're watching, and we've been through this whole process. And the one principle of that is reverence, because that's how it's being presented, is reverence of these guys, where they came from, what they put into it, and everything. You get the situation where you understand 100% what the UFC is doing. They're giving you an alternate feed where you can watch it be irreverent or you can watch it be reverent. And I feel like the people who compete in the sport, especially, are used to reverence, and I think that that's part of why they do it. There's a reason fighters become who they are, and they want that to be their moment. And so to have guys who are going to get in there and basically devalue or disrespect the situation and what these guys have put into it, it's going to rub people the wrong way. But from an entertainment standpoint, from another perspective, because there is so much irreverence in what we deal in, it's just a reality too. Like, you put these guys in there, there's going to be a certain faction that's going to watch that and say, like, that's actually pretty funny, and they want to view the sport from that more comical space. So in my mind, I'm like, go ahead. As long as you get to choose, who cares? If you can choose to watch one way or choose to watch the other, choose the one you want. But I have no problem with it ultimately.
Yeah. I think the difference here is that in other sports, we're talking about martial arts, and martial arts has some sort of respect attached to it that other sports perhaps don't necessarily have. And also, you're just not losing a game, but you're getting knocked out. So if you're getting a guy who's making fun of you while you got knocked out and saying things, I can see why the fighters don't like it. But personally, I love the Snoopcast. I'm somebody that covers the sport, and sometimes I have to write recaps on the Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender series. And being in the media, I kind of get tired sometimes of just listening to the professional broadcast, and this happens. And it's really refreshing to listen to Snoop Dogg, lay back, crack some jokes, hang out with your favorite. It's a really refreshing commentary.
What were people expecting? What were they expecting to get from Snoop Dogg? You know what I mean?
I also think this is part of the maturation of the sport, because if you say anything online and if you have sort of like a big platform like Snoop Dogg says, that catches on, and then they get some sort of some sort of pushback from fighters. In other sports, a lot of people say horrible things about other athletes, but you don't see athletes going out there and pursuing these media members. And you mentioned one time in your live chat, it has like a small town feel, MMA, and I think that's a perfect example. But now it's starting to turn into a bigger town, and part of that transition is what we're undergoing, and there's going to be some backlash from the fighters.
I mean, the truth is, fighters, I do think it's fair to say, if you fight 20 times, that's a lot more than 20 games. I mean, that's a lifetime of competing.
Like 20 seasons almost.
I mean, it's more like 20 seasons, really what it is. Depending, of course.
Yeah.
But the point being for me is I'm of sort of two minds on this one. On the one hand, I kind of want to just say to fighters is like, look, this is how fight fans talk when you're not around.
I know.
Right? I mean, it hurts to hear, but this is what I have been to many UFC parties. Trust me, they're not out there being all that reverent to the fighters, at least not in that moment when they're partying. I think in their heart of hearts they might be. And so I kind of want to just say, like, whatever criticism you guys are getting, this is a fraction of what LeBron James. And when Ronda Rousey got knocked out, people didn't hold back on her, man. They let her have it.
Not even Justin Bieber.
Right.
Even Justin Bieber said something like that?
He's like, oh, I'm glad you got knocked out or something.
Really?
Yeah.
Justin Bieber.
I mean, I just wish that it were executed better.
Okay.
I kind of feel like instead of watching, how long is the show? A couple hours long? I'd like to get like a 30-second highlights of the things that Snoop says over those 2 hours. Yeah. When I've sat and listened to the whole thing, I just feel as though it's just executed poorly. I don't like the chemistry between him and Uriah. I feel like Uriah is almost like, what is he going to say next? And so I haven't really enjoyed. I like the concept. I feel as though if you got somebody who was as irreverent as Snoop, and some people would probably complain, like, what if bring Nate Diaz in there? Let Nate Diaz smoke his weed and talk about the fights that are happening.
It's funny though, because he's a rapper. He's been around for a long time. A lot of the people respect his art. I think he has a very unique lens in which he's looking through when he views anything. Much less fighting.
I think he got this.
But there are guys out there who are, quote unquote celebrities who you always see cage side at UFC events and are more knowledgeable. I mean, that's the thing. This guy comes at it with it's not just him being irreverent. He has absolutely no knowledge at all of what's going on.
I think that's the point.
Well, why not?
Jim Norton hosts a podcast, but you have to interview fighters there, and da-da-da-da. There's a certain amount of legwork involved. Watching fights and just saying the dumb things that come to your head, this is what fight fans do. This is what they do. And so I think it's hard for some fighters to hear, and I understand that because they give more, I think, than a lot of other athletes. The only thing I think is an interesting thing to consider here about this, and we'll move on, is that it'd be one thing if it was like Joe Rogan's Fight Companion podcast, where it's his own thing, but the UFC pays for this.
Right.
And I think some fighters are like, so let me get this straight. You're paying for guys to get mocked by a guy who can't do 5 push-ups, you know?
Yeah.
I can understand.
Again, though, WME, like this entertainment-based system.
Welcome to your new world.
That's exactly right. So I feel like this is all par for the course of what they how they think. This is just a glimpse of how the new ownership thinks the sport should be.
So this next topic was on the rundown last week, and it was on last week because we were off for so long, we didn't get a chance to get to it. So it's a little bit dated, but I think we would be doing a disservice to the viewers if we didn't get to it, actually. Ramzan Kadyrov. Ramzan Kadyrov is the military dictator of Chechnya and has his own MMA organization called Akhmat MMA, where he not only stages fights but recruits fighters and uses this as a larger training ground for his military forces. It's sort of a very complicated issue, but more recently there have been pretty well-established reports that in addition to being a military dictatorship, there might have been a gay purge of brutal deaths of hundreds of gay citizens in Chechnya. And it turns out that not only does he have this Akhmat MMA thing, which, by the way, UFC has signed guys from there. Babulatov is from Akhmat MMA, and credit to the media, when he fought, they asked him, what do you think about this? And he was like, I'm just a sportsman, that UFC fighters and some managers in MMA have taken guys over there. Now, there's some degree of ignorance, I think, all of them that completed. But Jeff, what do you make of the world's involvement? What should be our answer to Ramzan Kadyrov? And I think more particularly, what should the UFC do about it? Because when they sign a guy like Babulatov, they might be saying, look, we're just trying to give a good flyweight a legitimate shot, but they're bringing themselves into being a promotional aspect to his nefarious efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you just said it. There's some acceptance of the ignorance that people have had. A lot of people did not, include myself. I had no idea, what was going on over there until until I started reading all the stuff that came off of that HBO show about him. But now we're not ignorant of it anymore. And I think the UFC, it would not be a big deal for the UFC to say, we're not going to do business with anybody who is connected to this guy's world. I mean, look, it's not like, the 11 champions in the UFC are all connected to this guy. I think they could very easily, the UFC is always looking for goodwill things they could do out there in the community. And this would be one, just to say, we're not going to do business with this dude or anybody connected with him. And we don't want any of our fighters going over there. If you're under contract with us, don't go over there.
Especially because you have a gay champion in Amanda Nunes. You have you have these types of things going on.
Don't you remember it was UFC 200? We are all fighters T-shirts.
100%. And sports in general is just an escapist thing to be doing, right? Like it's an escapist thing. That's why it succeeds. People want to be able to escape from reality. The UFC particularly skirts a very fine line between reality and sports. Like it kind of blends the two very nicely. You're getting a little bit of each because it's a very literal thing happening in the cage. I feel like when we see things like Verdum and Frank Mir and the guys who went over there, they're looking at it as a part of a sport, the privilege of a sport, the benefits, the frills or whatever. They're getting a paycheck. They don't really realize, from what I gather, just what kind of statement that it makes. Those pictures in retrospect and just that whole ordeal that was a couple years ago now, it just seems very weird. You look back on it and you think, man, that's just, you people, managers, everybody has to start looking past just the automatic dollar and look at these things a little more, examine these a little more deeply, because what would be the equivalent? We have social media today. We're able to see kind of these things and re-dissect it and re-understand from retrospect and talk with authority. It'd be like, James Braddock taking pictures with Hitler back in the late 30s, or something like that. You'd be like, well, you'd look back at them, you'd have very poor understanding of James Braddock at that point. Those guys don't want to be associated with that. The people who don't need to be associated need to stay away from that type of thing. And it's just another lesson in a very young sport that has that kind of pull, you know what I mean, that has that kind of infiltration globally. And I feel like it's just one of those weird situations, man. And you got to kind of forgive the guys who did it. I feel like most of them did it somewhat in ignorance.
Look, they're looking for. I'm sure they got paid a lot of money.
Exactly. Oh, they mentioned it. I saw Chris Weidman on Ariel's show basically saying, they paid me a lot of money. It didn't seem like he was putting too much of the political import on it.
Right.
I'm just saying, like, this is a sport where money being prize fighting, all that, it's going to lure, but I think these guys have to really pay attention to what they're doing.
And I think it's worth noting that most of those interactions with like the fighters and Kadyrov were before the HBO interview, which that's really what blew everything up. Obviously, there were some red flags there. Being a dictator itself is one of them.
Just a little.
Yeah, just a little bit. But the HBO interview is what really did it. And I feel like after that, the media has held accountable to the fighters to ask them, what are your thoughts on this? And I feel like then after all that, then fighters have been, standing off, and I think the UFC moving forward would probably have no ties with them and be very skeptical of signing any fighters with them.
Well, Voltov is still under contract. Yeah. He's not the only one from Akhmat MMA. But you have to give credits to two people. David Scott of HBO Real Sports who did a fantastic job, and then Kareem Zidane. 100%. Kareem Zidane of BloodyElbow.com. Boy, did he want to talk about raising the flag up the pole to let people know about this.
He's been at it. He's been at it for a long time.
To his own public, to his own, I don't know that he's not in danger for his physical safety. You don't see a lot of MMA reporting like that. So really want to take a moment to say to Kareem Zidane, 100%. You're a credit to media everywhere. And I wish we could all be as good as you. Before we get out of here, speaking of looking ahead, we have nothing to do. There are no fights. I mean, there's always fights everywhere over the weekend, but there's never like a big one. Then the weekend after, there is nothing. We don't have fights in MMA of, again, sort of national significance until the 25th, the day before Mayweather-McGregor, Bellator 182, if I'm not mistaken, which has a decent card. And then, of course, Mayweather-McGregor itself. Danny, what are we going to do with ourselves? What are you going to do?
Nothing MMA related. I'll probably go to the beach or hang out, sleep in. Go out, do whatever, but nothing MMA related.
I feel like your whiskey bottles are in danger.
No, man, I gotta slow down from that, man. I had 3 drinks yesterday and I woke up hungover. I'm like, what is happening? I don't even know. What are you gonna do?
I mean, man, there'll be so much in the build-up for this fight, obviously of its historical relevance, I guess, and also the novelty. There's going to be a lot. I already know I'm already working on certain things, so I'll be filling in the blanks just on that, solely dedicated to that fight.
I'll be working hard as well.
Yeah. Yes, of course. I really feel like, Jeff, yes, there's nothing this weekend, nothing the weekend after, but number one, UFC's right back at it September 2nd in Rotterdam, Holland. Now, as I mentioned before, there is that Bellator, there is Mayweather-McGregor. I kind of feel like most people are happy to not have anything coming up.
I think it's strategic, but it's also welcomed. And I think that you needed to give Mayweather-McGregor a big wide berth just to let that settle in.
We haven't had one for so long, like that kind of wide berth.
I know.
It just feels weird.
Is it too long, you think?
No,
I think it's just right, actually.
Not really, man. Not when you don't have an off season. You just keep doing this. Keep doing
I agree.
I also think this is not only a good break for fans to sort of get excited for that event, but also for the media, because we've been back to back with the whole Mayweather-McGregor press conference, International Fight Week, UFC 214. We've been back to back with big events. Yeah. So it's a good spot for the media to build up and really plan their coverage, as Chuck said, and for that big event. So I think it's a great
work on our sumo style wrestling.
Work on that Skip Bayless sumo style pinning player. Let's go down the line here. I'm going to pop quiz you. Here we go.
I hate this part.
If you're a Fight Pass customer, and Jeff, you could recommend to them either one fight or one event they should watch on Fight Pass in the next couple of weeks.
You mean like going back?
Hey, going back, and you can pick anything you want.
God,
what would you pick? I'll go first, so I'll give you a second. I would say Pride Body Blow. Pride Body Blow, to me, was one of the best MMA events ever before some of these bigger UFC events came along. You watch Fedor make the blueprint on how he beat Nogueira. You want to see Rampage Jackson in his prime against Kevin Randleman. This is your opportunity. Pride Body Blow is probably one of the best MMA events of the early era. And I think Anderson Silva versus Carlos Newton is on that card. Yeah. So check out that one.
I mean, for me, what I love about the Fight Pass is that I kind of just drop down the rabbit hole and I'll see one fight, and then at the bottom there's always like, check this one out.
Jeff, just one.
So what I do is this. I will pick out a champion and watch every single fight that champion fights.
Which champion?
Well, for me, it'd be Jon Jones. He's number one.
There you go. Fall down the rabbit hole, Jon Jones style. Chuck?
Matt Hamill, Rashad Evans. No, I'm just kidding. I would go back and I mean, this is the perfect time to go back and actually watch all of McGregor's fights. I mean, there are a lot of them
Great
are just.
point.
I mean,
Great
if
point.
you want to really understand how he's, you know, I watched the Marcus Brimage one of his first. I guess that was his first one in the UFC, and just seeing his eyes not blink as he's kind of punching. I remember the moment when I was watching that, thinking like, this is a guy who is seeing things unfold in slow motion before him, which is always that telltale thing when you watch other sports, guys who had the vision of the court or whatever it is, and you could tell he had that right away, and I think this only goes from there. So just the perfect time to go revisit all of his fights.
Yeah, Chuck stole my idea. Yeah, the other day I was watching, I think I was watching Mendes McGregor, and I forgot how competitive that fight was for the time that it lasted.
Yeah.
And it was just ridiculous, you know, seeing McGregor who he is now, and then just being, you know, crying and being super emotional, just winning the interim featherweight belt, and just going back, you know, looking at his journey, because it's really been a short journey to lead up to this huge fight. So you look back and look at these fights where he's yelling, you know, 60 G's, baby, and all that. That wasn't too long ago. And
60 G's.
You know, now he's fighting for over $100 million, maybe. So.
One thing I would not recommend is going back and watching old Floyd Mayweather fights.
I was going to disagree with that. In fact, here's what I'll say. Here's what I'll say.
On Fight Pass anyway. But
Yeah, you won't find those on Fight Pass, believe me. Last thing I'll say about this: if you want some Mayweather fights to go look up, I would recommend Baldemir, Corrales, and for lesser reasons but important ones, De La Hoya and Canelo. I would go watch those ones. I think if you can.
the Hatton fight was fun too.
The Hatton one's good. The Hatton one I feel like is not very representative, but
that's true.
Canelo is, and De La Hoya in terms
Maybe
of his
the first
modern.
Maidana as well.
I don't really see Conor as that kind of fighter. You're asking if it's an interesting fight. It is.
Yeah, I mean-
I just see Conor's style is that way.
I see.
And neither has Baldemir, but Baldemir put him in a little bit of trouble. Corrales was one of the major problems he ever solved. I thought that the new style of strategy came in the De La Hoya fight, and you saw that played out to a T in the Canelo fight. That's what the four I picked out.
People should, in all honesty, go back and watch some Floyd Mayweather fights, because if you don't watch boxing, you should try to put into context just how good he is. And I feel like that's impossible to just talk about unless you actually go watch
And
it.
everyone's like, Floyd Mayweather's so boring. Yo, go back and watch the Corrales fight and tell me if he's boring. Yeah. He knocked Corrales down 6 times. His own corner had to save him. And they ended that bout with Corrales beating the shit out of people. And Floyd schooled him. Yeah. So there you go.
And even boring, when you think about the idea of something being boring, when you're in a little ring with another guy who's a trained killer, and you can turn that into a boring event, that does elevate your ability to some stratosphere.
Are we on next week? I don't know.
Good question. The guy who always knows is not seated.
Yeah, the guy we rely on, we can no longer rely on.
Call us up, Ariel.
Way to go, Ariel. I think we're back next week, and then obviously the week after that.
Like you said, there's not a lot going on, so I believe we are.
Yeah. and the week after that, it's Mayweather-McGregor. We are not too far away, gents. It is going to be terrible. Well, it'll be something. All right, I think that does it for us. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure, of course, you subscribe to MMA Fighting below. We are going to have coverage of the Mayweather workout today from Las Vegas. The McGregor workout was supposed to be yesterday. They moved it to tomorrow, so our crew will stay in Vegas tomorrow and cover that as well. And that is going to be Conor's first response to Paulie Malignaggi. Boy, I wonder what he is going to say.
If anybody asks him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody will. No one cares at this point. So we're done. Thank you guys so much. For Danny, Chuck, Jeff, I'm Luke. We'll see you guys next time. Hands up, chins down, let them fly. This is the MMA Beat.